Imagine a world where Christ followers stepped up and answered his call on their lives. Imagine a world where Christ followers put their faith and trust in God unwaveringly and without qualification. Imagine a world where Christ followers lived out God's purpose for them in everything they do. The It's Not My Credit to Take podcast explores the awe and wonder of how God shows up in the lives of strong, principled Christ followers from all walks of life. Get ready to laugh, to cry, and to be transformed. I'm your host, Dr. Ed Slover, and I'm a faithful husband, loving father, loyal friend, and an unapologetic follower of Jesus Christ. Welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast. Hello, Kara. How are you today?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm really excited to have this conversation. My guest today is Kara Goodwin. Kara is a meditation and spiritual transformation coach, host of the Meditation Conversation podcast, energy healer, and beekeeper. She was drawn to meditation after a tragic year which brought many losses in quick succession. It felt as though her whole reality shifted, and she dedicated herself to learning and deepening her meditative practices. As a result, Kara has opened herself up to a strong connection with Source and uncovered latent energy healing capabilities and experiences frequent unexplainable phenomenon. These experiences have completely shifted how she sees the human experience and the power and potential of each life on Earth. Kara, welcome to the It's Not My Credit to Take podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Okay, I want to address the elephant in the room. You're a beekeeper.
Uh-huh.
Tell us a little bit about that to start.
Well, I'm not actually a classical beekeeper anymore. So I did start that way, but after a couple of years on my own podcast, I had a couple of authors on who do more bee-centric beekeeping, and they'd written a couple of books about it, and it was much more spiritual kind of practice and more in the rhythm of nature. And so I adopted their practices, which meant that I no longer harvest the honey and I don't actually go into the hives and manipulate them. They're like movable frames within the hives. And that's kind of, you kind of do animal husbandry with traditional beekeeping. So the way that I keep bees now is they're in like this octagonal, like from the outside, you can't tell, but inside it's an octagonal, shape, and it is very insulated. So there are a lot of like wood chippings in there to keep them really warm. And it's much more, it mirrors what they would do in the wild. So they would typically find like a hollowed out tree and have like really good insulation because they'd be right in there and they wouldn't be manipulated. They would build their own structures. They know like they're architects, carpenters, they use sacred geometry. They like attach, they'll like hold hands more or less, and like to measure distances. They're really, really fascinating. But because I don't go into the hives anymore, I still do have one hive. I lost a hive in between when I was doing classical beekeeping and when I started doing this beekeeping. And but I basically just go and spend time with them and observe them and kind of thank them, and I mow the grass. I don't keep them on my property. I keep them on somebody who has a lot more land than I do. I live on like a little postage stamp, and I have a lot of houses around me, so I can't keep them here. But I basically their lawnmower like 3 years ago said that, he kept getting stung because he has this massive mower that's really fast and he was just getting too close, I think. And that was also back when I did go into the hives and manipulate. And so they would get angry if I had just been there. But yeah, so I just go and I mow her grass, this little patch of land where the hive is, and I just kind of enjoy spending time with them, and I just leave them alone.
That's really interesting. I have to tell you, I learned more about beekeeping in those few minutes than I ever thought I would ever know about beekeeping. I mean, as far as I am concerned, when it comes to bees, I go the other way. And that's just the the order of things. So, share with us a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are in your life.
So I come from a really mainstream traditional background. I have 2 teenagers. I'm married. I went to public school, public university, lived in the corporate world. I think I worked in the corporate world for about 15 years, in IT. And it was, as you mentioned in the introduction, it was really through a series of tragedies in my life that happened very quickly, many years ago. And it was, my family and I were living abroad. We were living in Italy at the time. And my sister-in-law passed away. And then, like, 3 weeks later, I think not even quite 3 weeks later, our dog died. And then a few weeks after that, my stepdad was having to have surgery on his brain stem, spinal column type of area. I can never remember the exact thing that it was called, but there was anyway, he had like a degenerative issue going on. And we were like, is he going to be able to walk and talk? And um, my mother-in-law was hit by a motorbike while she crossed the street, and had a long recovery from that. And if like 2 or 3 months after that, my stepmom was in the ICU with a failing heart and ended up having a heart transplant. So all of this happening all at once, we're grieving one thing and then the next thing shows up, and all of that while we weren't even with our family. So my husband's family is in England, my family's in America, we were in Italy. So it was also like like that even added to the sense of chaos and helplessness, and so that was just a really hard time. And I'd always been curious about meditation, but not really made it a priority. And when that happened, it really kind of brought me to my knees. And I was, it gets to the point where it's like I feel that I was almost afraid to answer my phone because I just kept getting hit with this, one terrible thing after another. And I remember having a discussion. I don't know if I was very curious about like metaphysical things, the power of prayer, and people who like had special abilities, and children remembering past lives. All of those things still, like, I've always been very interested in that, but I really didn't feel a connection myself with any sort of divinity. And I think from God's perspective, I kind of felt like an NPC. Wait, NPC? NPC, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was
You
kind
were a
of
non-player character, Kara.
right. I'm like, he's not he yeah, there's so much going on in this world. Like, I'm sure, like, I'm not a priority. And so I really just felt like there were special people out there who were connected to divinity, and I was not one of those people and didn't really feel a lot of worth around that. But through this, like, catastrophe after catastrophe, um, I remember having a conversation walking back from my kids' school after I dropped them off, and I was like, it was kind of like, "Hey, let's just try this. Hey, God, if you know who I am, like, help me out." You know, this sucks. This is awful. And like, maybe, and I had all, like I said, I had always felt a curiosity about meditation, but I'd never been able to make a practice stick because I would just kind of sit there and not really know what I was doing and wouldn't really get anything out of it. And so I was kind of in this inner dialogue, like, I feel like meditation might be a pathway, like a something that could really help me now, but I, I'm in Italy, like, I would need it in English because I did speak the language, but not, it wasn't the language of my heart. It still was really tricky for me to, like, I had to really pay attention when I was in an Italian conversation. And it was like, I don't really want to learn something like meditation. It just didn't feel right. I need to be confident that I understand what they're saying. I had taken some yoga classes in Italian, for example, and you kind of keep having to open one eye, like, is everybody else like out of the position now? And I didn't catch that we're supposed to come out of it. Like, they said it in some unusual way or something. So it's like, I know relaxation's a big part of it and I want to feel relaxed. So I want it to be in English. But if this is a thing that could help me, help me find how to do it, lead me in the right way. And I've kind of forgot about that. It wasn't one of those things like I said that and then I was like looking at every corner, but looking back and then remembering that I had done that and then seeing that things did develop rather quickly, where conversations started happening and, I'd almost overhear things that was, where, for example, a teacher that really spoke to me, who's actually deceased, but there's a Paramahansa Yogananda. I don't know if you're familiar, like autobiography of a yogi.
Oh, yes.
So a friend of mine, an expat friend, her mom recommended the documentary that spelled out Yogananda's life because her mom had liked it so much. And my friend hadn't even watched it yet. And we were just sitting in my little courtyard and she's like, "Hey, my mom told me about a documentary. I think you'd really like it." Like she had to get her phone out to look at the note that she had taken. She hadn't even watched it yet. And I thought, "Oh, okay, I really respect Pam and she knows me and maybe I'll try it." And I loved this movie and it really did feel like there was something there because this was because his approach was very practical and very like cause and effect, but he definitely had a big spiritual element to him. And that kind of came later for me, that acceptance that there was, that I wasn't an NPC in terms of, in God's perspective, and that there was a relationship there, and that, I was worthy of that. All of that kind of came later. But the meditation piece, I was able to learn meditation using his methods. And that was a great big leap onto a different path for me and propelled me into where I am now.
And Yogananda used the Kriya Yoga
Yes.
meditation method. Can you describe that just a little bit, sort of the Cliff's Notes version?
Yeah, so Kriya Yoga is a type of breath work or pranayama exercise, and it comes from Babaji Krishna, who is apparently, they say he's still embodied, but he, is hundreds of years old, lives in the Himalayas and can bilocate and so forth. Um, and but he, you have to be initiated into it. So in kind of my path with meditation, with Yogananda's techniques, I have been initiated into Kriya Yoga is what it's called, but it is breath work. Yoga just meaning union. Um, and so it's a powerful breath work technique. And because there's an initiation part, it's secretive, it's kind of this coveted knowledge. But to be really honest, completely just based off of my own experience, because I got initiated into that about 5 years ago, a little more than 5 years ago. And it is very powerful. But I think that the like secrecy and initiation part was more applicable in a different age. We have access to a lot of really powerful pranayama exercises like Wim Hof, I mean, just as one example, that can change our physiology and our chemical makeup, which is what is happening with Kriya Yoga as well. They're not the same practice, but I feel personally that whole initiation process is outdated, and it was for a time. It was for a different time. Now we have access to a lot more, and humanity is in a different place. Our consciousness is in a different place. Um, People are at a different place than they were, you know, back when that was necessary. So, in my humble opinion.
You referenced changes to physiology. In what ways does meditation actually change our physiology or even certain aspects of our brain?
Yeah, so meditation is really amazing in the way that it changes our brain because very simplistically, you kind of have your more ancient animalistic part of the brain, for example, the limbic system, which is literally lower down in your brain. that's where your fight or flight is. That's where your separation is. That's where your fear, your anger, all of that, your kind of like survival is linked with the limbic system. So if you're in a state of being afraid or being angry or something like that, the limbic system's what's going to be active. And then conversely, if you move up to the front of the brain, kind of the prefrontal lobes, sort of behind the forehead, that's your more evolved. It's literally a quote unquote newer um, part of the brain from an evolutionary standpoint. As we've evolved and new centers within the brain have kind of come and developed and come online, that's the newer part compared to the limbic system. So it's where we feel a sense of oneness, where we understand that we're all connected and that our actions are related to other people, and the results of those actions reach out to other people. Our joy, our forgiveness, our altruism, all of that is related to activity in the frontal regions of the brain. And so with meditation, you can intentionally bring your awareness up to the front of the brain. You can focus on, for example, the point between your eyebrows, simply meaning just becoming aware and keeping a sustained focus there at the point between your eyebrows. That draws energy up into your prefrontal lobes. And just like if you go to the gym and you work out and you're working on your biceps and you keep doing those repetitions with your bicep, you're delivering energy and focus to your biceps, and it literally builds up that muscle. And it's the same thing with meditation, where as we draw our focus to the front of the brain, we're building up connections and pathways that naturally over time mean that those are stronger within us, so that when we are just out in our non-meditative state interacting, we're approaching life with a stronger prefrontal lobe, and we're kind of interacting with the world from that perspective rather than with the limbic system engaged as often. Does that make sense?
It does. It reminds me of the difference between responding versus reacting, where
Yes.
the prefrontal cortex serves as executive functioning and allows us to respond, versus, to your point, the limbic system is highly reactionary for sure. As you were describing the focus between the eyebrows and the skull, it got me thinking about the third eye chakra.
Mhm.
And in terms of physiology, in your experience, how does meditation help to open up or maybe even unblock not just the third eye chakra, but all seven chakras?
What a great question. So, your third eye is related to the pineal glands. This is part of the endocrine system. And because with the chakras, these are energy systems within the body. So if you were, they're energy, they're not physical. So if we were to dissect the human body, we're never going to get to the point where we're like, oh, look, there's their sixth chakra or whatever. But there does seem to be endocrine lineup with where each chakra is. Um, and so for the third eye and also the crown, there is this pineal connection, pineal gland. And this seems to be where this, like the physical part of the body that's related to the opening of that third eye. And it actually has a biological um, composition that is similar to the physical eyes. So it's not an actual eye, but it does have some rod and cone cellular structure, just like our physical eyes. So it is where, when we can see things with our inner sight, that is activity within the pineal gland. Now, what's interesting is that the pineal gland in modern times is very often calcified for a lot of people just through modern living. So fluoride is one of the major culprits that keeps that calcified. So fluoride in our water, fluoride in our toothpaste, heavy metals that we take in just through living, the pollution that we have, all kinds of things kind of act in concert to calcify that. And when it is calcified, that makes it dormant. So if there are people out there who are like, wow, I'm really interested in my third eye and I would love to be able to have inner sight or have, and tap into my intuition more, then exploring pineal gland decalcification is something that I would advise. And there are different ways to go about that. You can do it through listening to sounds, even. There are sounds and frequencies that can help with that. I went through a decalcification detox just like couple of months ago. And that was pretty hardcore. It was a very intense decalcification. So that would be something like I wouldn't just dabble in that. That would have to be like, yeah, I really want, because it's if you imagine like something that's calcified and you start to break up that calcification and then it moves through the body. I had swollen glands, lymph nodes, like swollen all through my body, headaches, fever. Like it was essentially like having the flu for a while, but it was just this stuff breaking down and moving through my body. So it's not it's not a casual thing, but there are a lot of different ways to decalcify it. But one of the things, like if you're not tapped in yet to the perils of fluorinated water and toothpaste, I highly recommend looking into that, and stop using those things to start to reverse that process.
Yeah, a number of months ago, I graduated to distilled water
Mm.
and Tom's toothpaste.
Okay. Now,
Just to get
see,
off of it.
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know much about distilled water because I think they take something out that we need in that way. There are like trace minerals that I often put, because I have an RO system, reverse osmosis, which kind of clears everything out. That's pretty heavy filtration. But I put back in these trace minerals, that's just like a liquid trace mineral. But because we want to be sure that we're not stripping everything out, because there is
Yeah.
some stuff that we do want to take in. But
As you were talking about the pineal gland, I couldn't help but remember a meme that I saw several months ago that went something like, "What do you look like, or what do you look for in a romantic partner? A decalcified pineal gland." I mean, and for those people who don't know what that is, it obviously would be lost on them, but it's clearly funny for the rest of us.
right.
Now, whenever we're able to access a higher level of consciousness through meditation, what does the term non-local mean?
So non-local is kind of, or the way that I think of it and use it would be sort of a non-linear, it's beyond time and space. So you can think of it as quantum as well. I kind of use quantum in that way too, where when we're moving through our life, our regular everyday human life, we use time and space all the time to understand our reality. And when we start to engage with higher levels of consciousness, time and space becomes less of a factor. So in these heightened states, for example, when you start seeing things in your inner realm, um, you may be accessing information that doesn't seem related to this life. You may be tapping into a previous life or getting information about somebody else that is not with you at that moment, or even just sometimes the way that I experience things is like I'm in a spaceless place that is very geometric. I'm seeing a lot of colors, lights, and geometries. And so it's that's what I mean by this non-locality in terms of it being beyond time and space and that sort of linear way that we experience life in this physical plane.
And when you're there, when you're in source. And there's only God, so we're always in source. But in that heightened state of awareness, what do you find the practical value of that to be in your life? And I ask that because the experiences that I've had, I've been able to articulate them and put words to them, but sometimes I struggle with translating what I was made aware of, what I learned to this particular life.
Yeah, I know. It's so fascinating. And I know you and I spoke earlier, a few couple weeks ago, and I shared some of the insights that I've had that were very practical to, very everyday, but I understood the answer, the resolution to a problem from a much higher level and saw all of the interplay and how it was something that's, another party that needed to be involved, how it helped their life and their purpose, and how it helped me with things that I struggle with in my own life, and how it would be good medicine for me from that perspective. But sometimes, like you say, there's not it sometimes it's just an experience and there's not extra insight that comes in. In fact, I would say more often than not, when I don't have these experiences all the time. I don't want to make it sound like I can just drop into meditation and boom, here are the geometries, here are the insights. I wish I could do that. I really love to have these experiences, but I don't seem to have as much control to be able to kind of have them come in at will. It seems to be developing that I can do it easier and easier, but it's still not like supply and demand, you know? Um, but I it's interesting because I was speaking with a friend of mine quite a while ago now, who's a psychiatrist, and he's such a great psychiatrist. But we're just out to dinner, and he's kind of questioning very similar question to what you asked, like, so what does it mean? How does it help you? How does it change you? And I'm like, well, I enjoy it, and it makes me feel good, and I feel connected. And he kept asking, he kept kind of changing the way he asked it, but we kept circling around it. And I was like, what is it that you want me to say? What are you? And he's like, yeah, you're right. I am leading you. But he's like, I feel that you have experience of life beyond death. And as such, I wonder if it makes you not fear death. And I was like, huh, that is very interesting because it is this, it's not a human experience. It's not like an earthy experience. It's something different. And it does seem to be connected to spirit and to soul. Um, and it is comforting in terms of it pointing to there being more to existence than what we experience in the everyday. And so does that translate into eternal life from a soul level? I would say yes. Um, but I hadn't really thought about it in that way before. But I thought that was really profound and beautiful. That was a great observation that he had, and I would say that that rings true on some level. It's not something that I consciously had even tapped into with my regular awareness, but I think that there's something to that.
I do too. Growing up as a Christian, but not really a churchgoer, we're taught to believe that this life is a one and done experience. And if we don't crack the code, if we don't follow the recipe in terms of how salvation is laid out, then we go down. But if we do, if we can pass this test, then we go up, and that's that's really it. And in that arithmetic, heaven or hell, it almost seems like everything else is incidental once you make that particular decision, versus what you're describing, Kara, is the soul is on a journey, and You were able to realize that through meditation, but there are countless numbers of near death experience people, survivors, whatever we call them, that actually point to there, in fact, being a life after this costume dies. Right. So, with in the ever expanding consciousness on the planet, and I'm asking you to spitball on this one a little bit. What do you think the future of religion and the rules and the strictures associated with that with them are?
It's such a great question. And, it does feel, and there's a lot of evidence to point to this of consciousness that humanity is undergoing right now, a huge transformation very quickly at an unprecedented rate. And it's really difficult, I feel, as an individual to kind of um really claim, is that accurate? Am I really seeing it? I see it in my world, but it's also from my perspective. Who am I surrounding myself by? What am I watching? What am I reading? I'm getting that reinforcement, but I'm also kind of seeking out that reinforcement too, just by what I'm naturally drawn to. But I'll hang out with other people, family members, or other people who are, deeply entrenched in religious dogma, and then I'm kind of pulled out of that. I'm like, "Oh, no, it's still very much an entrenched part of people's lives." Um, so I feel that as there's this continuing evolution, traditional dogmatic religion will fall away because people will have more and more of their own experiences. You kind of get to points within your own experiences where you understand that that divinity really is within you. You don't need somebody feeding it and interpreting it for you, especially when it seems clear that there's an agenda there and there's a use of fear, misplaced fear, that is serving somebody else. That it's being fed, and it's that fear that people are feeling that's coming from religion is serving the agenda of a few. And if that is the case, the more that people have their own experiences within and they start to really connect to their own souls, they'll reject that. They'll turn away from that. So, um, in my own in my own life, in my own little petri dish of reality, what I'm observing very much, in within less than 1 week, I had 3 different discussions, people reaching out to me that they don't know each other, they don't know what's going on with each other, but 3 different existential crises of in showing up in different ways, some of them through relationships, some of them through trauma, buried trauma that they knew had gone on, but they thought they'd gotten through. But it was all very existential in nature of this, like, not only like, why is this happening, but why is it happening right now? Like, where is this coming from? Why do I feel this way? Why am I feeling this angst? Why do I feel like I can't take one more step in that direction? Um, and it feels so powerful to them, but also subtle. So in the case of like relationships, marriages, people who've been married for 20 years, and it's not like there was some major something that happened. It wasn't like, oh, one of us found somebody else and there can't be 3 of us in this relationship. Nothing that like black and white, but just a like, I realize I'm not my authentic self anymore in this relationship, and I feel like I have to cater to what this other person expects from me, and I can't do it for another day. Why? Why do I feel this way? Where did this come from? And I think that these are signals of a much bigger thing that's playing out on this planet, where it's like the frequencies, the energies, and there's a whole other thing to get into there in terms of photonic light and the the um, the solar system, where it's rotating into, and where our planet and our sun and all of that is rotating into, and the magnetics of the planet. There are a lot of like very tangible physical things that are helping to support that, in addition to these eons of time, Kali Yuga, and these big humanitarian shifts of consciousness that are that we go in these cycles of. So all of that kind of working together, that is but it's like showing up in people's lives, because that's what's happening,
Yeah.
but it leaves people with like, what is going on? Why is this happening?
Yeah. It makes me curious how many people seek out how many people in the United States specifically seek out traditional Western medicine because whether it's a spiritual awakening or being on the receiving end of an ascension in vibration and frequency, it sows a lot of confusion. And it's like, what the heck is going on? And unfortunately, what a lot of Western medicine, all that does is dull everything anyway, which, as far as I can tell, would actually slow down the collective elevation of consciousness in that regard. I mentioned in the opening that you are a meditation and spiritual transformation coach. What does your work look like? Like, what's a day in the life or a week in the life of Kara Goodwin look like?
Well, I work with people, so I have a group of people that I meet with regularly. We do meditation. We talk about, kind of more esoteric philosophical types of things. Um, right now I'm working on a book, and I'm trying to get that to my publisher, hopefully maybe even tomorrow. But hoping to have that out in the next, I was hoping it would come out this year, but that's not how it happened. So 2024. Um, I love to do retreats. So often I've got retreats that I'm planning. I've got one that's will happen probably in April. And then I've got my podcast. So I do my podcast, and then I have once a month I do live streams with the Conscious Awakening Network. And so I'm a host on that platform as well. And so I just love to connect with people, with guests who are exploring consciousness and healing modalities, and have their transformational stories. And we talk a lot about like quantum technology and all kinds of things like that. And then also connecting with people who listen to the podcast. I love to hear from people in that regard. So in addition to, that's from the spiritual coaching type of work. And then, I've got my children and my animals and my
And your
husband
bees?
and the bees. Yeah, we're off season right now. They're hibernating, but yeah, that's what it's like.
It sounds like a charmed life, I have to admit.
I enjoy it. It's very fulfilling. It's very, very fulfilling. So it's funny to talk to people, you kind of like, we just had Thanksgiving a couple of weeks ago here in the States, and you catch up with people you talk to once a year or whatever. And somebody was asking me about my work, and it was like, having this discussion with somebody who just isn't really in this type of work. So it's just an interesting discussion, because it's like, well, I get a lot of joy from the work, and it's really deeply fulfilling, not necessarily hugely, financially successful. So it depends on your criteria for success in terms of that. But it's like, and I am lucky in that way, that that I do get to do something that I love so much. I haven't found that sort of magical formula where it, you know, pays great financial dividends at this point, but it is deeply fulfilling.
That's awesome. How can listeners learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. So I have a website, karagoodwin.com. You can go on there and get a free meditation. There's a 10-minute guided meditation on there. My podcast, Meditation Conversation, I've got all kinds of topics. If you like the type of content that you're hearing here today, I've got heaps of conversations such as this. Um, and there are some guided meditations in there as well, if that's what you're looking for. I tend to be on Instagram too. That's Kara_Goodwin_meditation.
Wonderful. I'll make sure and put that in the show notes.
Mhm.
Before we wrap up, do you have any final thoughts for the listeners? Anything you would like to leave them with?
Yeah, I would just say, keep going, keep exploring. It's not so much about getting to any sort of end point. So sometimes we can be so focused on, there may be things that we talked about in this conversation today where it's like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. And the pineal gland, let's say, um, it's so we can maybe I know that sometimes I struggle with like, oh, am I on the back foot? Like, how much more do I not know about what's going on? But it's a journey, and the whole point of it is the unfolding and the journey itself. So even if you've only been on this journey for a month, a week, or whatever, just enjoy it for what it is and try to avoid feeling like you have to arrive somewhere and that there's this end point in time. It, just like you said with the heaven and hell type of thing, that duality, that like, am I going to make it to heaven? Am I going to be sent to hell? And what's the determining factor? It's not like that. It's just this unfolding, and we get to build our lives step by step, moment by moment, brick by brick, choice by choice, and so it's just enjoy that as it goes and let the opportunities come and trust that the things that are showing up for you when they show up it's the right time and it's the right thing for you to be hearing at that time.
That's so good. That's really great advice. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for taking time to share your knowledge and insights. I really appreciated this conversation and your time.
Thank you. It's been such a joy. Thank you for all the work that you're doing with your podcast and with your work. I've really enjoyed getting to know you.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Kara. Many blessings. You can contact the show at itsnotmycredittotake.com. We'd love to hear from you. God bless.